Australia, it's 2008 and it's the darkest timeline. Heath Ledger is dead, Coney is still at large, and Shelley Craft has quit the great outdoors to host Australia's funniest home videos. And yet, amongst all this anarchy, stocks in Australian soccer were rising. Yes, despite some utterly woeful football bludgeoning the eyes of fans week in, week out from the tactical masterminds of Terry Butcher and Richard Money, the A-League is somehow cementing its place in the Australian sporting landscape. With a third successive year of record-breaking crowds and TV viewership, the FFA saw fit to capitalise on that momentum with expansion. And where better to expand than the cane toad slinging, Wally Lewis worshipping Mecca that is Queensland, blessing their 4X drinking locals with some good old fashioned soccer. So in comes North Queensland Fury, defunct, and Clive Palmer's Gold Coast United, also defunct. Yes, Clive Palmer, a man who made his millions from defiling the earth, saw fit to defile Australian football with his ill-conceived concoction of a football team. Now, despite Gold Coast being notorious as scorched earth for any professional franchise that dare steps foot in its bogan oasis, he thought he could pry the locals away from their glowworm caves and their Pacific Fair Mall to come watch some wogball by the beach. How wrong he was. Gold Coast had been a bloodbath for professional sports in the 90s. Starting a team in the Gold Coast was as good as filing for bankruptcy. But yet, despite the fate of the Bears, Chargers, and Rollers before them, AFL and Rugby League were also breaking ground during the same period. But that didn't worry Clive, because Clive had a plan. A plan to win the hearts and minds of the Sunstrokes locals. The plan? The Invincible. Yes, it was quite simple really. Replicate the buzz of 2001 Highbury and humble Rabina. Indeed, what is a Thierry Henry to a Golgo Mabratu? The North London Derby to the Iron Ore Cup? Nike's Oxygen kit to the Freedom of Speech jersey? I mean, is there any real difference? So after securing the services of their marquee signing, Branko Kalina's son, Clive boldly proclaimed that they would go the season undefeated. A statement that created exorcist levels of head-turning. It's hard not to get excited by Jason Kalina. He was, after all, a big dick socceroo in his prime who had spent the last decade in the Eredivisie. But there was plenty on offer for some doe-eyed optimism. Some big local names were lured to the Sunset Strip, including Charlie Miller, who was the Raw's third biggest alcoholic at the time, a non-sack-whacking Griffiths from the Jets, and studs-up enthusiast Steve Pantelides from Victory. Michael Thate, Joel Porter, and Jess Van Straten all returned from Europe. A swag of Brazilians were flown in to add some samba to the strip, and chuck in a few promising youngsters such as James Brown, Taj Minakong, and future Ivory Coast international Adama Traore, but the most notable and impactful signing by far would be none other than Golden Boot and Johnny Warren medal winner Shane Smeltz, who was nicked from the Knicks to return to his hometown with promises of a bigger payslip and living rent-free in one of Clive's own penthouses. Admittedly, one of his shittier penthouses, but a penthouse nonetheless. And who would be the man to lead such a team to an unbeaten season than none other than Myron Bleelberg, the man who sought to resolve Brisbane Roar's goal-scoring issues by fixing the locker room's feng shui. And there you have it, the Gold Coast Invincibles, a claim they were able to hold true for a good 3 games. Well, they did go a full pre-season undefeated at least, which did include wins against no one's favourite EPL side Fulham, as well as a win against a team of equal respect in the football community in the Tweed Valley Kings. Now, despite not living up to Clive's lofty ambitions, most would classify Gold Coast's opening campaign a positive affair. Their debut saw them claim a 3-1 scalp over their neighbours, a pre-Ange Roar. In fact, they swept all the M1 derbies with a 5-1 win at Suncorp and a 1-0 win at home that nearly killed Clive. Yes, you heard me right, the tightly contested affair saw Clive collapse in his corporate box with chest pains, although he would later downplay the incident as merely heartburn. They pummeled their more inbred neighbour North Queensland 5-0, which saw Fury fans attacking bins in sheer unbridled rage. They also had a clean sweep against eventual Premier Sydney, which saw Sydney fans attack their own players in sheer unbridled rage. Oh, they also took out the Iron Ore Cup, which was a thing for some reason. Shane Smeltz was utterly ruthless in front of goal, winning the Golden Boot with a record-breaking 18 goals for the campaign. And a personal highlight for me was seeing Jason Kalina hit a cup in the back of the head. It wasn't all smooth sailing though. Their biggest blight came at the hands of Wellington, who humbled them 6-0. But it was the catalyst to spark a revival in form. A 7-game undefeated streak soon followed, and with 2 games to play, Gold Coast were in the front seat to take the premiership, seeded second only on goal difference. But back-to-back losses saw them splutter their way down to third, 4 points off Premiers Sydney. Their season would underwhelmingly fizzle out in the first week of the finals after losing in a penalty shootout to Newcastle, which saw Christian Rees execute one of the worst penalties ever recorded to film.
And he's blasted that one into the grandstand. He couldn't handle the pressure, the big defender.
But the football always seemed to be a mere garnish to Clive's egotistic eccentricness, which saw him become the A-League's most enigmatic figure since Gary the Gorilla. He really wanted Gold Coast to be seen as the Ritz of Australian football, yearning for comparisons with Chelsea and Roman Abramovich. He was flying choppers into Skilled Park, proclaiming they would win the Champions League. He promised to use his private jet to fly his players to away fixtures. He took his team on an overseas tour of Southeast Asia, which, unlike most Australian team tours in Asia, didn't end in a sex scandal. And when overseas interests were circling on star recruit Shane Smeltz, he straight up told them to fuck off. Something unheard of from local sides at this point. Plus, to further showcase his immense wealth, he got his company to become the shirt sponsor of rivals North Queensland Fury. Some kind of a weird flex. But with eccentricness comes melodramatics, with Clive chucking never-ending tantrums like a sleep-deprived toddler. After the FFA backflipped on letting Gold Coast host their season opener, Clive lashed out by threatening to boycott the fixture, barring his team from engaging with the media, and telling United fans to stay at home for the game. He threatened to take the FFA all the way to the Supreme Court for suspending Steve Pantelides after a straight red. He called the FFA corrupt because they wanted to move a potential Gold Coast home grand final away from Skilled Park to accommodate a bigger crowd. He demanded Frank Lowy call for the resignation of Sepp Blatter for being a shit cunt. He told Frank Farina to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and face his problem. He also found time to call the Australian government racist after they rejected a visa application for a Ghanaian trialist, which he compared to that of the White Australia policy. And amongst all this, he would never refute rumours that he would hand back his licence come the end of the season. With Clive out here being our no-frills answer to Donald Trump, alongside the broken English of Mad Myron, who was neither mad, nearly Jewish, there was an infinite amount of press being generated by these two walking soundbites.
I don't have my G-string, but I got my thongs straight to Copacabana.
So commit suicide, Tony Abbott, you know?
But despite their larger-than-life profile, none of it caught the public's interest. From the get-go, they were blighted by underwhelming attendances, with crowds as big as your average gangbang. Season 1's crowds averaged 5,200, their following season dropped to 3,400, and crowds in Season 3, to put it eloquently, remained dog shit. They had the honour of the lowest average attendance in each season they competed, with only 3 fixtures in their history cracking over 10k. North Queensland Fury, who were a quarter of the population of Gold Coast, yet equally bogan, were getting better crowds, so why wasn't it working in the Gold Coast? Were the bucket bongs of Broadbeach too tantalising to lure the locals away? Well, yes, but there were other factors as well.
They should bring their friend and their girlfriend, and maybe instead of 2,000, we have 6,000.
Gold Coast were heavily criticised for their build it and they would come mentality because, well, no one came. There was always finger pointing to the lack of community engagement, as the club was never viewed as a team for the Gold Coast people, but more a team for Clive's own ego. On top of this, the most obvious concern was the ticket prices. The cheapest seat in Robina Stadium cost a cool $37. Yes, $37, something that everyone other than Macarthur Bulls management would call ridiculous. Clive blamed the ticket prices on the stadium rent, claiming it cost $140,000 to rent the ground for any fixture that had over 5,000 in attendance. So Clive had a simple, if not smooth-brained solution to this problem. Introducing Gold Coast United's crowd cap, restricting attendances to a maximum of 5,000 people, with only one stand open to the public. It wasn't even the biggest stand either, so every match televised was nothing but hollow emptiness, like I am inside. The fans responded accordingly, with crowds dropping instantly, down 40% right off the bat. While Victory were averaging 22,000, Gold Coast were playing in front of a sea of empty blue seats with a library-like atmosphere. Supporters in The Beach, the club's official fan group, not just some people I spoke to at a beach, protested by brandishing banners saying, "Scrap the cap! Cap is crap!" and "Want fans? Ask us how." All of which were pretty shitty slogans, if we're being perfectly honest. In their final season, a last-ditch attempt to woo fans was made. Ticket prices were finally priced at acceptable levels, $5 for kids, $20 for adults. But it was all too little too late. The disconnect with the Gold Coast public was fully apparent when in that same year, the Gold Coast Suns locked in 11,000 members for their inaugural AFL season. United, in comparison, had a mere 400 members. The FFA did acknowledge there was a problem and took over the club's marketing halfway through season 1. But their bright ideas to turn things around included making Warwick Kappa their mascot and releasing gift wrapping paper that had the Queensland Roar players dressed as fairies. I really want to know what else was on the short list of ideas. Maybe, I don't know, a white boat shoe as a mascot perhaps. No, because that made the final cut. Meta. While things weren't working off the pitch, the team remained formidable with a 4th place finish in their second season. But you would think, for a team that was only 3 points off an Asian Champions League spot, a game away from the Grand Final, National Youth League champions, plus back-to-back Iron Ore Cup winners, there would be more talk about the football. Sadly, discussions on the longevity of the club were always at the forefront. Clive's objective appeared to shift from winning the league to hemorrhaging the losses. The charter jet was put back in the hangar in favour of the community bus. The pre-season tours of Southeast Asia was replaced with team camps in Byron Bay. No more ticker tape parades for their Iron Ore Cup heroics. And now formerly indispensable commodity Shane Smeltz was very much dispensable for anyone who offered anything as good as a 6-pack of nuggets. So Shane Smeltz was downgraded with Bruce Jitte, assistant coach Paul Ocon was downgraded with Mike Mulvey, and Jason Kalina was downgraded with Peter Perchtold, which is like downgrading a Lamborghini with a 1992 Daihatsu Charade. Also, who the fuck is Peter Perchtold? I can tell you one thing, it's not this guy, because that's Bas van der Brink. A sign of the times was the quality the club was once linked with. In their debut season, Gold Coast were linked with Red Devil stars Park Ji-sung and Henrik Larsson. But when they ultimately landed a former Red Devil, it was an underwhelming journeyman named John Curtis, who is as remembered at Old Trafford as Nelly Yoa is at Stamford Bridge. Come the end of Season 2, Gold Coast knew the writing was on the wall. With North Queensland being punted out of the league, it seemed only inevitable that Gold Coast would soon follow suit. Cost-cutting measures were enforced by the club, only offering 1-year contracts and building a team mostly out of their youth team prospects to save every penny that they had. And Clive isn't one to squander money pointlessly, as demonstrated by his $100 million investment in a dinosaur theme park in Coolum that looks like this. Unfortunately, the third and penultimate season, football would rarely be the focus of discussion. While fielding a squad that was primarily made up of players from their title-winning youth league squad, it rarely proved formidable against grown-ups. Sure, the side did feature future A-League stalwarts such as Daniel Bowles, Jared Tyson, James Brown, crypto fraudster Zach Anderson, Chris Harrell, Ben Halloran, and Joshua Brillante. The potential of these acne-riddled teens could not stop them from securing the wooden spoon with 2 games to spare. But what they lacked in success, they made up for in drama. Their final campaign was rife with litigation. German import Peter Perchtold, who again, I couldn't tell you a thing about, other than that's not his photo, that's Daniel Severino. But Peter decided to sue the club after having his contract terminated when he refused to have his 2-year contract shortened to a 1-year deal. Robson sought legal action after having his contract terminated for refusing to take part in a youth team fixture after being demoted for drink driving, while Jason Kalina decided to go against the trend and not sue Gold Coast United, but rather sue the FFA for not having him insured after having a season-ending injury at the Asian Cup. But as the end of days grew near, the story of Gold Coast United was quickly turning into a daytime soap opera. A Gold Coast squad already short on experience is depleted further when captain and notorious flasher Michael Fate has to serve a 1-match suspension, while logically the next most experienced player would normally fill the hole. Clive, who again decided to seek $100 million to make a dinosaur theme park that looks like this, decided to step in and name a 17-year-old as captain. Not audacious enough, it was a 17-year-old who hadn't even made his professional debut yet. Meet Mitch Cooper, the A-League's youngest ever captain. He would go on to captain his homeland of Vanuatu, but he'd be considerably older at that time. Myron downplays the situation, proclaiming it as merely a symbolic gesture, with step-in captain Mitch solely there for the coin toss. But this throwaway comment enraged Clive so much so that he served Myron with an infinite suspension. However, Myron would never serve this suspension as he had had enough, resulting in Mad Myron becoming unemployed Myron when he quit the club in protest. But Clive was growing tired of merely pissing off his own staff, so he sought to endear himself with the wider football community when he was quoted as saying that the A-League is a joke. I don't even like the game. I think it's a hopeless game. Rugby league's a much better game. The amount of irrelevant bloggers who took offense to this hit critical mass, resulting in an endless supply of think pieces that no one read. With speculation mounting on Gold Coast survival, Clive's animosity towards Frank Lowy and the FFA was reaching a boiling point. Once upon a time, Clive was so enamored by Australia's 2022 World Cup bid that he opened the gates free to the public so locals could thank Frank for his efforts. 25,000 free tickets were snapped up by the public, only for God to punish such generosity by washing out the fixture. But that was the last act of camaraderie between the two. Clive was calling out the excessive salaries of the head honchos at the FFA, which was 5 times more than their NRL counterparts at the time. He used this as ammunition regarding the FFA's lack of investment in the Gold Coast, where Clive, on the other hand, had dumped $18 million into the franchise. And when a report came out that ranked Australia as second last in the AFC for corporate governance, oh, you bet Clive was all over that shit. Some of Clive's more notable quotables included calling Frank Lowy a dictator who had lost the plot, doubling down by stating that Frank Lowy is an institution who now belongs in an institution. But it wasn't all one-way traffic, as Frank Lowy clapped back by labeling Gold Coast a spectacular failure, while Ben Buckley chimed in describing Clive as an unnecessary distraction. But like Clive at a buffet, he wasn't done. Clive was incensed at the Olyroos not qualifying for the London Olympics, furious at the absence of Gold Coast players from the side. It was the first time Australia hadn't qualified for Olympic soccer, and Clive saw this as the epitome of the FFA's incompetence. It reached a crescendo with Clive challenging the Olyroos to take on Gold Coast United with a $50,000 winner-takes-all bounty up for grabs. However, the FFA did not entertain the proposal because they're gutless cowards. Weak, gutless cowards. Pathetic little coward! Murmurs were afoot that Clive was losing patience with the fickle Gold Coast locals and was considering rebranding the club as Queensland United, shifting their home fixtures across Townsville, Mackay, and Rockhampton. However, he would not get to investigate that possibility as the limited edition Freedom of Speech jersey dropped with drip so hard that it would kill a franchise. Freedom of speech. It's something that every person has, but you only ever hear the phrase when someone's being called out for being extremely racist. But these 3 simple words would ultimately bring the Gold Coast United empire crumbling down. Backstory: Clive Palmer was in a legal dispute with the shirt sponsor Hyatt Regency and decided to strip the company off their jersey. Instead of going for a clean skin jersey, their jersey was adorned with a yellow rectangle that read in bold capital letters, Freedom of Speech. Which was ironic considering Myron Bloomberg was only suspended weeks earlier for his comments to the media. It was claimed a Freedom of Speech slogan was in reference to the refugees. You know, just refugees in general. Nothing topical or anything, just, you know, refugees. But it was clearly a direct jab aimed at the FFA, who were growing weary of Clive's anti-establishment comments. When presented with a material breach by the FFA, Clive doubled down, saying he'll keep using the slogan until the end of the season. And with that, the FFA had enough ammunition to finally give Gold Coast United the boot for bringing the game into disrepute. Clive attempted an injunction with the Supreme Court to save his beloved club, but to no avail. The FFA took over Gold Coast for the last 4 rounds of the season. However, there was no strong will to keep the franchise afloat. Even when a consortium presented a $1.5 million bid to save the club, the FFA's attention was solely focused on the Western Sydney expansion bid, which had significantly less megalomaniacs involved. But the idea that a man of Clive's ego was going to humbly walk away a defeated man is simply laughable. Chatter began immediately that Clive was planning on starting a rival league as a fuck you to the FFA. It was rumoured that Tony Sage and Nathan Tinkler were interested in the proposal, as they too were growing dissatisfied with the FFA's governance. Although the idea died as quickly as it came, due to FIFA stating that it would not acknowledge a breakaway league, meaning there would be no protection for the players who would join. So instead, Clive's final attempt at sticking it to the man was to start his own watchdog organisation called Football Australia, with the tagline, "We kick harder." Yes, Football Australia. It had long-term ambitions of being the new federation to replace the FFA and run football from grassroots all the way to senior level. Despite the initial waves it caused, the organisation seemed to only exist for 3 months, with the only thing it managed to achieve was launching a superficial inquiry into the state of football. Even as the fight was well and truly over, Clive's pettiness knew no bounds. He hired a helicopter to loop around Hunter Stadium, adorning a Freedom of Speech banner before a Jets v Gold Coast fixture. He even attempted to have his Football Australia watchdog be the shirt sponsor for Adelaide's AFC campaign, but a last-minute injunction from the FFA saw the $300k deal go to the dogs. And then there was nothing. $18 million of investment, and nothing. Pour your Forex out for your fallen soldiers. And it seemed to me you lived your life like a candle in the wind. So, where are they now? Well, after 3 chaotic seasons, Clive Palmer decided to do something much easier than running a football club. He decided to build the Titanic 2. Although it's not clear if this ever made it to the assembly line, his focus would soon turn to politics after launching Palmer's United Australia Party, which is as buoyant as the Titanic is today. In 2013, Clive would be elected into the House of Representatives as the member for Fairfax, where he would make history by being the most absent MP in Parliament. In the last federal election, the Palmer Party spent $100 million on advertising with an incredible 1-seat return. Gee, 100 million. With that kind of dosh, you could build your own dinosaur theme park. Some of Gold Coast United staff remained loyal to Clive in his political adventures. Christian Reeves, Scott Higgins, and CEO Clive Mensinks all ran unsuccessfully for the House of Representatives. Hell, even Shane Smeltz had a crack in politics, where he ran for the seat of Bundaberg, winning 244 votes. Jeez, I'm pretty sure Ivan Milat would have gotten more votes. And he's dead! Nowadays, Clive spends his days spreading anti-vaxxer misinformation, purchasing Adolf Hitler's cars, and suing B-tier YouTubers for calling him fat. As for Gold Coast United, well, that embarrassing bit of history was swept under the rug, like any references to Woody Harrelson's father, never to be spoken of again. Update, Gold Coast United are back! Minus the baggage of Clive Palmer, of course, although the emotional baggage is still there. Yes, in a comeback as welcome as the return of polio, Gold Coast United re-emerged in 2018 in NPL Queensland, where they've been plodding along being remarkably unremarkable. But that hasn't stopped them from getting the old gang back together. When Christian Reeves wasn't too busy losing federal elections, he was busy losing as a head coach. Michael Fate also came back to captain the side. Hell, even Shane Smeltz returned to bag another couple of top scorer accolades because he's Shane fucking Smeltz, New Zealand's greatest export since Richard Wilkins. And there's even another Kalina emerging, with Branko Kalina's grandson regenning as part of their academy setup. At the moment, the club is currently shortlisted for the National Second Division, so their return to the spotlight may soon be coming. Probably not though, let's be real, Gold Coast has as much right to football as Manus Island has to schoolies. Well, thanks for taking a trip down to Nostalgia Town. Gold Coast was definitely a vibe, in the same sense that Chernobyl was a vibe. There were a few tidbits I didn't get a chance to pick up on. Myron's lizard system, Daniel Severino kissing the badge off his 20th professional football club, Ante Rozic's diarrhea costing his team 3 points. Oh, and don't forget the time Shane Smeltz was sold to Shanding Luong, only to be replaced by Shane Smeltz? Yeah, the striker decided to flee mainland China after lasting 5 whole days at the club. Something a bit different this video, a bit different than Olin Tekers talking about which female athletes he wants to fuck. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Also, if anyone does have a freedom of speech jersey, please hit me up. I will pay a huge sum of Dogecoin to have that in my pool room.